Israel. Welcome back as we continue our study of the commandments found in the Torah. This video will go over the tithing laws. I'm hoping most of you have seen my video, to tithe or not to tithe. This video will go through the specific laws involved in tithing and prayerfully confirm for you doubters out there that what I taught in that video is true. I had a lot of Christian pastors messaging me after that one because they thought I was teaching people not to tithe, basically. But this is what I was teaching. The tithing doctrine is valid because it is part of the law and the law is valid. However, a portion of the tithing doctrine cannot be kept today. Just like I'm showing you guys several laws that can't be kept today in this study, I'm putting 3 asterisks next to these laws, valid laws, but can't be kept today. So most of the tithing doctrine fits into this category. And the part of the tithing doctrine that can be kept today is only for the needy. That's the charity part. Tithing needs to be fully understood because too many pastors are manipulating it for financial gain. I expect money-hungry pastors to prey on you guys. That's what they do. What I want you guys to do is educate yourselves and not get preyed on. So here's a quick summary of what I taught in my video, to tithe or not to tithe. The Israelites paid 3 separate 10% tithes, totaling 30%. The first was called the Levitical tithe. It was only for the children of Levi, the Levites. They didn't have an inheritance, so they worked in the temple for a salary. When the other tribes of Israel gave 10% of their increase for this tithe, it went to the Levites as a salary. If you read Numbers 18, verse 21, it reads, I have given the children of Levi all the tenth in Israel for an inheritance, for their service, which they serve, even the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. So this tithe had a specific purpose, to support the Levites as their salary for their work in the temple. That's it. Once you've removed the temple, the place of service, from the equation, and once you've removed the Levite, whom this tithe is for, there is no longer a need for this tithe. That means no pastor of a church is authorized to take it from you. Why? Because he's not a Levite, and he's not working in the temple for a salary. The Levitical tithe is for the Levite only, and only as a salary for him. And there was a sub-tithe called the heave offering. When the Levites received their pay, they in turn tithed 10% of that to the priest. Numbers 18:26 says, Speak to the Levites and say to them, when you take the tithes from the children of Israel, which I've given you as an inheritance, offer up a heave offering of it for the Most High, a tenth of the tenth. And verse 28 says the heave offering went to the priest. So I've heard of pastors trying to collect a special heave offering. You can't do that either. You're not a priest in the temple. This offering, too, had a specific purpose and was for a specific person. Don't let these preachers get rich off of you. There's a reason they're living in million-dollar mansions while their congregation is living from paycheck to paycheck. Pay attention. It's not supposed to be that way. Let's talk about the second tithe. Another 10% was set aside as the festival tithe. Festival tithe had a specific purpose as well. It was purposed to sustain the Israelites during their stay in Jerusalem for the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Deuteronomy 14:22 says, You shall truly tithe all the increase of thy seed. And verse 23 says, And you shall eat before the Most High in the place which he shall choose to place his name there. And verse 24 says, And if the way be too long for thee, so you are not able to carry it, or if the place be too far, turn it into coin and bind it up and take it to the place. Pay special attention to the part of this passage that says, Eat the tithe. This means the festival tithe was for you. The Israelites were not commanded to give this away. They were commanded to take this tithe to, quote unquote, the place the Most High chooses. The temple in Jerusalem was that place he chose. And they traveled to it for the festivals. And it says, for those who live too far away, in verse 24 through 25, to exchange their items for coin, so they'll be easier to carry. And verse 26 says, and use that money for whatsoever your soul desires, cattle, sheep, wine, strong drink, whatever you wish, and rejoice. They were commanded to eat it in the presence of the Most High. I've heard people say that there was no coin back in the day. They tithed food and spices. Well, Deuteronomy 14:25 confirms there was coin. when it says to exchange what they had for coin if what they had was too heavy to travel with. So there was coins back in the day. So the purpose of this second tithe, the festival tithe, was to sustain the Israelites for their travel to Jerusalem. It's the equivalent of setting aside money in a savings account for a vacation at the end of the year. You'll need money for a hotel, rental car, food, etc. So the Most High was telling them to set aside 10% of their increase, and once in Jerusalem, enjoy it there. Eat the tithe in the presence of the Most High. So again, we don't give this tithe away. Your church is not the temple, and your pastor is not the priest. So 2 tithes that cannot be kept today by scattered Israel. The third is called the poor man's tithe. It's the most important of the 3 to us today because it's the one of the 3 tithes that can still be kept. We find it in Deuteronomy 14, verse 28 through 29, and Deuteronomy 26, verse 12 through 13. In Deuteronomy 26, 12, 13, it says, when you have given your tithe to the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that they may eat within thy gates and be filled, then you shall say before the Most High, I have brought away the hallowed things out of my house, and also gave them into the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, according to all of thy commandments. I have not transgressed thy commandments, neither have I forgotten them. So here we see who the poor man's tithe is for. Not just the Levite who has no inheritance, but also for the stranger, the fatherless, the widow, those in need, those who lack because they don't have the support of a father or a husband. They're a stranger with no connection. This is why it's called the poor man's tithe. No, we no longer have gates in the land in which the poor can eat, but the specific purpose of this tithe was for the stranger, the widow, the fatherless. There are plenty of those around us, plenty of needy individuals around us. Genesis 17:5 says Abraham would be the father of many nations, and I believe this tithe was a part of that manifestation, the chosen nation of Israel giving to the needy. That's the way it was meant to be. People of the Most High serving mankind in this manner. We were never meant to throw our money in someone's collection plate. Meanwhile, people are sleeping on park benches and abandoned buildings and underneath freeways. And pastors are living in mansions. That's backwards, Israel. Think about it. Now, part of the reason Christianity wants you to forget about the commandments, to be done away with them, is because leaders of this religion don't want you to read the part of the Torah that instructs you on what tithing really is, or else they would be broke. They don't want you to be informed. They want you sobbing at the altar, feeling hopeless and helpless, trying to buy your way into a blessing, throwing your money at the altar, at their feet. This is why these preachers really don't like me, and I really don't care. It's the truth anyhow, and I say it with love. I said it before, the tithe is not purposed to maintain some preacher's church, to build a new church, to pay the mortgage for a church, utilities, a pastor's salary, your pastor's mortgage, or his bills, private jets, supporting his or her travels around the world to preach. If you were meant to do all of that, you'd have the money to do it already, without the detriment of the members of your church, without being a burden unto the people. I've seen mega pastors travel to other countries on private jets to preach, completely overlooking the thousands of lost, broke, homeless individuals in their own city. You know why? They're going to collect more tithes from naive followers around the world. I know the game. I'm just grateful I'm no longer a victim of it. So if you want to pay tithes, set aside 10% for the needy. The other 2 tithes can no longer be kept today. That's a summary of my video, to tithe or not to tithe. Now let's go over the laws that deal with the tithing system, the actual laws. Starting with charity or gifts for the poor. Reading Leviticus 19, verse 9 through 10, it says, And when ye reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of thy field, nor gather the gleanings of thy harvest. And verse 10 says, And thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Most High your God. From these 2 scriptures derive the following laws. Law number 239, to leave a corner of the field uncut for the poor. The command is to always put aside a corner of the field uncut for the poor, or in today's context, put aside something, money or food, for the needy. Law number 240, not to reap that corner. This command reiterates not only putting aside a portion for the poor, but making certain you do not gather it, or in today's context, eventually keep it for yourself. We've all heard of charities that accept offerings for the needy, but keep a percentage for profit. The commandment is very clear about what we put aside for the poor. We shall not reap from it. More laws based on Leviticus 19, verse 10. Law number 241, to leave gleanings or leftover crops. Law 242, not to gather gleanings. Law 243, to leave the gleanings of a vineyard. And Law 244, not to gather the gleanings of a vineyard. We're seeing several laws here about the uncut portion of the field and the gleanings of the field. And the same applies for both the field and the vineyard. So the difference between the uncut portion of the field that we should not touch and the gleanings or leftover crops that we should not touch is that leftover crops may have fallen to the ground throughout the vineyard or just have been left behind throughout the vineyard. So not only did the needy have access to that corner that was left uncut, but all the other leftover crops throughout the vineyard and the field. Putting this into today's perspective, imagine if you desired to feed the homeless, right? You had a feast, and what was left over from your feast you gave to the homeless. This is considered your gleanings or your leftovers. Now imagine when you cooked for your feast, you actually cooked a portion of your feast for the needy. It wasn't leftover, it was purposely made for the needy. That's the equivalent of the uncut field. They purposely left a part of the field uncut for the needy. So not only would we cook a portion of our meal for the poor, but also give them our leftovers, for example. That's what the Israelites were commanded to do. We no longer have a field, I know, but we do have food in our homes, and there are needy individuals all around us. No temple or priest is required for us to keep these commandments, so it can still be kept today. Going on to Law 245, to leave the unformed clusters of grapes. 246, not to pick the unformed clusters of grapes, based on Leviticus 19:10. Now looking at Deuteronomy 24:19, it says, when thou cut down thine harvest in thy field, and hast forgot a sheaf in the field, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow. Two commands derive from this scripture. Law number 247, to leave the forgotten sheaves in the field, and 248, not to retrieve them. The same idea is found in these commands, except this is unintentionally leaving behind something or forgetting it. We're commanded to let that be a blessing to the poor, not to go back looking for it. The under meaning here is that if we forget about it, we probably didn't need it in the first place. And again, we see in Leviticus 19:10 why all of this was done. It was done for the poor and for the stranger. So this is our charity. These laws deal with gifts to the poor. Now looking at the tithes, starting with the poor man's tithe. Law number 249, to separate the tithe for the poor. Deuteronomy 14:28 says, at the end of 3 years thou shalt bring all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. We are commanded to separate tithes for the poor. In verse 29, we see exactly who this poor man's tithe is for. The Levite, because he has no inheritance, and the widow, which are within thy gates, shall come and eat and be satisfied. Laws 250 through 251, to give charity and to not withhold charity from the poor. Deuteronomy 15, verse 7 through 8. If there be among you a poor man of one of thy brethren, within any of thy gates in thy land, which the Most High has given you, thou shalt not harden thine heart, nor shut thine hand from thy poor brother. Verse 8 says, but thou shalt open thy hand wide unto him, and shalt surely lend him sufficient for his need in that which he wants. And these two commandments were commanded not only to set aside tithe for the needy, but to give to any among you in need. Do not harden your heart, but give freely to him. Now, some may argue that the Israelites only gave to the poor in the land and only of their brethren. But if we denied a needy person in our presence because he or she was not an Israelite, or because we were not in our land, our hearts are hardened and our hands are not open wide for those in need. Let me remind you guys that although one nation was chosen, it was not because they are better. but they are to be an example set for many to follow, and denying a poor person food or whatever they need is not the example we were chosen for. So yes, the scripture says in Deuteronomy 15:7, if there be a poor man of thy brethren within thy gates in thy land. Although it specifically says that, I choose to obey this command outside of the land, towards anyone in my presence in need. You may make your own choice for you. I choose to do what I believe represents the Most High. So that's the poor man's tithe. Let's look at the Levitical tithe, the tithe set aside for the Levites only. And you will see 3 asterisks by all of these because, again, they can no longer be kept today. Law number 252, to set aside Truma Gadola, which is a tithe for the Kohen, based on Deuteronomy 18, verse 4, the first fruit also of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the first of the fleece of thy sheep shalt thou give him. When we read the command in its context from verse 1 through 3, we see the Levites had no inheritance, so the Israelites were commanded to give unto them. Notice the 3 asterisks by this law. This command can no longer be kept today. We see in Numbers 18, verse 21, this portion was given to them for their service in the temple as a salary. Again, it reads, I have given the children of Levi all the tenth in Israel for an inheritance for their service, which they serve, even the service of the tabernacle of the congregation. This means no temple, no Levite, no Levitical tithe. And remember, I mentioned earlier about a heave offering the Levite was to set aside after receiving their tithe from the other Israelites. So we see in law number 253, the Levite must set aside a tenth of his tenth. Based on Numbers 18:26, thus speak unto the Levites and say unto them, when ye take of the children of Israel the tithes which I have given you from them for your inheritance, then ye shall offer up a heave offering of it for the Most High, even a tenth part of the tenth. In this command, the Levites who received a tenth from their Israelite brethren were to then put aside a tenth and offer a heave offering for the priest, according to verse 28. This is another law that can no longer be kept, as there is no temple or priest. Again, it is not okay for any minister or pastor to attempt to collect this offering in the name of a Levite. This is an abomination of the commandments. Law number 254, not to preface one tithe to the next, but separate them in their proper order. Based on Exodus 22, verse 28, thou shalt not revel the gods nor curse the ruler of thy people. So as you can see, the scripture says nothing about putting tithes in their proper order. This is because the actual command is found in verse 29 instead. So 2 asterisks are placed next to this command because it needs to be changed to match its actual scriptural reference. So Exodus 22, verse 29 reads, thou shalt not delay to offer the first of thy ripe fruits and of thy liquors. Law 255 says a non-Kohen or non-priest must not eat truma, which is a gift offering. And Law 256, a hired worker or bondsman of a Kohen must not eat truma. Both based on Leviticus 22, verse 10, there shall no stranger eat of the holy thing. A sojourner of the priest or hired servant shall not eat of the holy thing. These commandments are for no non-priest to eat the holy food. This is a law that applied when Israel resided in their land as a nation, so it can no longer be kept today, but it does remind us of the sanctification of the priestly position. Law 257, an uncircumcised Kohen or priest must not eat truma. Exodus 12:48, and when a stranger shall sojourn with thee and keep the Passover, let all his males be circumcised and let them come near and keep it. It's very likely a Kohen will be circumcised, but this law is expressing the fact that they were to make certain he was circumcised. Law 258, an impure Kohen or priest must not eat truma. Based on Leviticus 22, verse 4, what man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper or has a running issue, he shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. The command is that an impure priest must not eat of the holy things until he's clean. Again, a law that can't be kept in today's world, but is still a reminder of the expectation of purity from a leader of the Most High. Law 259, a chalala, which is a product of a forbidden relationship or one that is in a forbidden relationship, must not eat truma. Leviticus 22:12, if the priest's daughter also be married unto a stranger, she may not eat of an offering of the holy things. The command is if the priest's daughter is married to a stranger, she may not eat of the holy things, another law that can no longer be kept today. Looking at the law of Mazer or tithe, law number 260, to set aside Mazer each planting year and give it to a Levite. Numbers 18:24, but the tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer as a heave offering unto the Most High, I have given to the Levites to inherit. Therefore I say unto them, among the children of Israel, they shall have no inheritance. In this command, similar to 252, we see more specifically what the Levitical tithe is purposed for, to support the Levites because they lack an inheritance. So we've talked about the Levitical tithe, the poor man's tithe. Now let's go into the festival tithe, aka the second tithe. Law number 261, to set aside the second tithe, which is the festival tithe, based on Deuteronomy 14:22. Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field brings for the year by year. Here the Israelites are commanded to set aside a tenth. Verse 23 tells us why. It reads, And thou shalt eat before the Most High in the place which he shall choose to place his name there. And verse 25 explains that if that place be too far, exchange the tithe into coin, and upon arrival purchase whatever you desire. So the Israelites consumed that tithe during their festival travels. The next three laws are all based on Deuteronomy 26, verse 14, which reads, I have not eaten thereof in my mourning, neither have I taken away aught thereof for any unclean use, nor given aught thereof for the dead. But I have hearkened to the voice of the Most High my God, and have done according to all that he has commanded me. The commands are 262, not to spend its redemption money on anything but food, drink, or ointment. 263, not to eat mazer sheni, which is the festival tithe, while impure. 264, a mourner on the first day after death must not eat mazer sheni. The next three laws are based on Deuteronomy 12, verse 17, which reads, Thou may not eat within thy gates the tithe of thy corn, wine, or oil, or the firstlings of thy herds. Verse 18, But thou must eat them before the Most High in the place which he shall choose. The commands are 265, not to eat mazer sheni grains outside of Jerusalem, not to eat mazer sheni wine products outside of Jerusalem, and 267, not to eat mazer sheni oil outside of Jerusalem. Notice 3 asterisks have been placed by all of these laws because they can no longer be kept today. The festival tithe was to be consumed only in Jerusalem during the festivals according to Deuteronomy 12:18. It could not be eaten within their own gates. We can still honor the festival days, but when it comes to tithing for them, setting aside goods to travel to the temple and specifically consuming them there, that portion cannot be kept. Law 268, the fourth year crops must be totally for holy purposes like mazer sheni. Leviticus 19, verse 24 reads, But in the fourth year all the fruit thereof shall be holy to praise the Most High with. The command is that the festival tithe be used totally for holy purposes in the fourth year. No offerings or tithes or gifts to the poor were to be given from it. Law 269, to read the confession of tithes every fourth and seventh year. This confession is found in Deuteronomy 26, verse 13 through 15. It's a speech they gave. It says in Deuteronomy 26, 13 through 15, Then thou shalt say before the Most High, I have brought away the hallowed things out of my house, and also have given them unto the Levite, and unto the stranger, to the fatherless, and to the widow, according to all thy commandments which thou hast commanded me. I have not transgressed thy commandments, neither have I forgotten them. I have not eaten thereof in my mourning, neither have I taken away aught thereof for any unclean use, nor given aught thereof for the dead, but I have hearkened to the voice of the Most High my God, and have done according to all that he has commanded. Look down from thy holy habitation from heaven, and bless thy people Israel, and the land which thou hast given us, and thou hast sworn unto our fathers, a land that flows with milk and honey. This is the confession of tithes the Israelites were commanded to confess in the third and seventh year of tithing in obedience. So we've gone over the poor man's tithe, the Levitical tithe, and the festival tithe. Now let's look at the laws of first fruits. These next commands are about what the Israelites were to do with their first fruits as far as bringing them to the temple for the priest. Again, none of these can be kept today. Law number 270, to set aside the first fruits and bring them to the temple, based on Exodus 23:19. Law number 271, the Kohanim must not eat the first fruits outside of Jerusalem, based on Deuteronomy 12:17. 272, to read the Torah portion pertaining to their presentation, based on Deuteronomy 26:5 and Leviticus 23:10 through 14. According to Deuteronomy 26:1 through 11, this presentation was a full pledge of a harvest to come and a reminder of the history of the Israelite nation. Law number 273, to set aside a portion of dough for the Kohen, based on Numbers 15:20. 274, to give the shoulder, 2 cheeks, and stomach of slaughtered animals to a Kohen, based on Deuteronomy 18, verse 3 through 4. These commands reiterate law number 252, stressing that not only is a tithe to be set aside for the Levite, but for the first fruits portion. This law pertains to the Levitical tithe and can no longer be kept. Law number 275, to give the first shearing of sheep to a Kohen, based on Deuteronomy 18, verse 4. Law number 276, to redeem the firstborn sons and give the money to a Kohen, based on Numbers 18:15. Law number 277, to redeem or consecrate the firstborn donkey by giving a lamb to a Kohen, Exodus 13:13. Law number 278, to break the neck of the donkey if the owner does not intend to redeem it, based on Exodus 13:13. We're working our way through the so-called list of 613 commandments of the Torah. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. I go through these laws pretty swiftly, so you can also follow along on my blog site, riseofthechosen.blogspot.com. I want to thank you guys for your support and for your continual prayers. Until next time, this is Jediah. Shalom.